The cerebrum. The cerebral hemispheres are two, that is left and right. The two are interconnected via the massive corpus callosum, which is one of the commissural fibers of the cerebrum. But the corpus callosum interconnects the cerebral hemispheres point for point. The word cerebrum can be used interchangeably with cerebral hemisphere, but not with cerebral cortex, for the cortex is a part of the hemisphere. The parts of the cerebrum are as follows. The cerebral cortex, this is the most superficial and also the most sophisticated and rostral of all structures, not only in the cerebrum but also in the whole of the neural axis. Intermediate zone. This zone contains mainly fibers which crisscross and run in various directions. The fibers are either association, commissural, or projection fibers. The intermediate zone may be rightly labeled cerebral medulla. The last is the basal ganglia. Phylogenetic considerations and classification of the cerebrum. We have the following subdivisions based on sophistication of the apparatus. The least sophisticated of the part of the cerebrum is the archicortex or the archipallium. This is followed by the paleopallium or the paleocortex. Then we have the most sophisticated and the newest addition to the cortical apparatus, which is the neocortex or neopallium. The archicortex is the least sophisticated in the cortex. It is the most primitive, appearing first in the lower vertebrates. In man it is made up of the following structures. Number 1, hippocampal formation or hippocampus. Number 2, indusium grisum. Number 3, dentate gyrus. Number 4, fasciolar gyrus. In man it is difficult to say clearly what the function of the archicortex is, but the hippocampal formation is well known to take part in the memory mechanisms, that is, specifically in immediate memory. This is because we know that a person who has a hippocampal disease may suffer from impairment of immediate memory. There are 3 different types of memory mechanisms which are distinct. They are short-term, long-term, and immediate memory. Those who get old find that the impairment of memory is more with immediate memory than the others. Long-term memory is extremely well developed in old age. The archicortex and the so-called juxtalocortex have only 4 cytoarchitectonic layers. The paleocortex. This is the spell brain. It is also called the rhinencephalon. In man, it is not fully developed because man is a microsomatic animal. And his ability to smell is subjugated by his ability to see. He is therefore a social animal, for only what is seen becomes important in social activity and interaction, rather than what is smelt. Olfactory pathway. The pathway for the olfactory nerves begins in the olfactory epithelium of the lateral wall of the nasal cavity. The receptors are attached to peripheral fibers of the bipolar olfactory neurons, which transverse the cribriform plate of the ethmoid. They are about 20 in number. The cell bodies lie in the olfactory bulb. The central process is now synapse, with second-order neurons which enter the olfactory pathway. This pathway is divided into 2, medial and lateral olfactory striae. At the synapse, they form a glomerulus with more than 1 neuron. Medial olfactory striae terminates in the subcallosal gyrus. The lateral olfactory striae carries fibers which terminate in the piriform lobe and the periamygdaloid body. The 2 structures mentioned, that is subcallosal gyrus and the piriform lobe, are part of what is called the primary olfactory cortex. The third order neuron now projects into the secondary olfactory cortex, called the entorhinal cortex. Fourth or third order neurons issue from the entorhinal cortex to reach the highest centers for olfaction in the hippocampal formation and the insular cortex. Piriform lobe is made up of the following: prepiriform lobe, prepiriform area, uncus, and the anterior part of the parahippocampal gyrus. Periamygdala body is surrounded or surrounds the amygdala nuclear complex. It mediates sensation of smell around the amygdala. Amygdala nuclear complex is divided into two: corticomedial nucleus and the basomedial nucleus. It has two main efferent projections. Number one, the striae terminalis. Number two, ventral amygdalofocal projections, which may be also divided into two types: to the hypothalamus through the amygdalo-hypothalamic tract, and then to the thalamus and via the amygdalothalamic tract. Because of the intimate connection of amygdala with these diencephalic structures, its function is similar in the control of visual activity. For example, the stimulation of amygdala leads to ovulation. It is also said to control gonadotropin levels together with the hippocampus. Smell types. There are 7 primary smells recognized. They are as follows: number 1, camphoraceous; number 2, ethereal; number 3, musky; number 4, floral; number 5, putrid; number 6, pungent; and number 7, pepperminty. The neocortex. This is the most sophisticated of all the parts of the brain, and the most sophisticated of its telencephalic structures. It is massive in man, and the process by which it becomes this massive is usually termed prosencephalization, which reaches its peak in man. For its function, it is provided with gyri, which increase the surface area of a superficial part of a complex, of a cortex. It is divided into lobes as follows: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. There is also buried lobe called the insular cortex. Also, there is a functional lobe involved in the process of emotions and behavior. This is called the limbic lobe. The frontal lobe. The frontal lobe of the cortex seems to be the one that is most highly developed for cognitive mental functions, which may include thinking, rationality, memory, abstract and concrete thoughts. It is also thought to have a function in emotions and personality formation. This is because in 1936 a surgical procedure was designed to cure permanently insanity. This procedure was termed prefrontal leucotomy, which literally means cutting through a white matter of the frontal lobe, thereby separating the frontal lobe from its prefrontal connections, because it is believed that the prefrontal part of a lobe is responsible for personality and behavior. Unfortunately, the preparation went out of hand, so that the individual loses his personality and becomes docile. He behaves like a vegetable and is unable to reason out things himself. He performs anything he wishes without worrying about its consequences. By the 1950s, the procedure was stopped because of its barbaric nature, and also because of the discovery of new psychotropic drugs which are able to make a psychotic man perform his functions satisfactorily. The above abandoned procedure is called psychosurgery. The prefrontal area is therefore responsible for psychic motor function. That is to say, it helps the individual to his individualistic reactions to his environment. The way he will behave is peculiar to him and not to anyone else. This individuality is one of the attributes of the human race. The area that takes part in the emotional and pre-evolutional mechanisms in the prefrontal region are the areas 6 to 8. Area 4 is part of the frontal lobe, and it takes care of voluntary motor function. In this area, the entire human body is structured around the precentral gyrus, which is the motor area. This gyrus is placed between the precentral sulcus and the central sulcus. The gyrus has a representation which is called the homunculus. This homunculus has a large representation of the hand at its inferior aspect to demonstrate the importance of the hand generally in motor function. The buttock is placed at the edge of the superior aspect of the precentral gyrus, so that it extends from the lateral to the medial aspect of the frontal lobe. The rest of the frontal lobe is divided into superior, middle, and inferior frontal gyri. There is also gyrus rectus, which is placed at the basilar part of the brain overlying the olfactory tracts. Welcome to the next and concluding section of the cerebrum. We shall start this section by talking about the parietal lobe. This lobe is recognized for sensory activity. It has the post-central gyrus, which carries the areas 3, 1, and 2. The sensory fibers are projected into it from the thalamic radiations. The rest of the parietal lobe is divided into superior and inferior parietal lobules. The inferior lobule is further divided into supramarginal and angular gyrus. The areas outside the sensory cortex are the psychic areas, which control the way and manner that we perceive sensory information from our environment. The occipital lobe. This is responsible for visual activity. It has the visual cortex, which is in the areas 17 to 19, although most of the areas include also psychic components to what we see. The occipital lobe is separated from the parietal lobe by an internal parieto-occipital sulcus. This sulcus forms a Y-shaped sulcus with a carceran sulcus, whose bed contains the visual cortex. In the occipital lobe, we also have the cuneus and the lingual gyrus. Temporal lobe. This lobe is mainly known for auditory, vestibular, and gustatory functions. Areas 41 and 42 are considered auditory, while area 43 of the temporal lobe is gustatory. It has the following gyri: superior temporal gyrus, middle temporal gyrus, and inferior temporal gyrus. There are certain parts of the brain which extend their gyri beyond the ordinary boundaries of the cortical lobes. We have a lateral and medial temporal occipital gyri in the bases of the brain. The parahippocampal gyrus, subcallosal gyrus are also found. The insular lobe. This insular lobe is considered to be part of the limbic system and is therefore a part of the emotional apparatus of the brain. It is buried in the cerebrum lateral to the basal ganglia. Its white matter is the extreme capsule, which is directly medial to it. Medial to the extreme capsule is the claustrum, followed by the external capsule and then the lentiform nucleus containing globus pallidus and the putamen, which is also part of the basal ganglia. Intermediate zone of the cerebrum. This contains fibers as follows: number 1, associating fibers; number 2, projection fibers; number 3, commissural fibers. Association fibers are divided into two: long and short association fibers. There are a number of examples such as uncinate fasciculus, arcuate fasciculus, and the superior longitudinal fasciculus. Projection fibers. Examples are the coronary radiata, which later becomes the internal capsule. Commissural fibers. These interconnect the sides of the brain. You have the anterior commissure, which is a telencephalic structure, and also the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum can be divided into the following parts: genium, splenium, and rostrum of the corpus callosum. It is the largest commissural fiber in the brain. Thalamic radiation. These are projection fibers which accompany the internal capsule across the diencephalon and the basal ganglia. They arise from the thalamus and project upwards to reach the sensory cortex. They are divided into the following parts: anterior thalamic radiation, which accompanies the anterior limb of the internal capsule; posterior thalamic radiation, which accompanies the posterior limb of the internal capsule together with the retrolenticular part of the internal capsule. Also, occipitopontine fibers are associated with it. superior thalamic radiation, which is the last, projects from the thalamus to the parietal lobe. This is the very last one. Is the inferior thalamic radiation, which projects fibers from the thalamus to the temporal lobe. It is accompanied by the temporal pontine fibers. Brodmann's area of the cortex. These include the visual cortex from 17 to 19, gastric cortex areas 43, sensory cortex areas 3, 1 and 2, motor cortex area 4, premotor cortex areas 6 to 8, and auditory cortex areas 41 and 42. All these areas tend to have 6 cytoarchitectural layers in their cortex as follows. The most external is the molecular layer, followed by the external granular layer, followed by the external pyramidal layer, followed by the internal granular layer, followed by the internal pyramidal layer, and finally you have the fusiform layer. The names of these layers are the same names given to the cells found in the larynx. Thus we have granular cells found in the granular layers, fusiform cells found in the fusiform layer, and pyramidal cells are found in the pyramidal layer. Functions of the cerebral cortex. The cortex has 2 main functions: recognition and performance. Recognition is a sensory phenomenon, while performance is a motor phenomenon. Inability to recognize is called agnosia. Inability to perform is called apraxia. There are several examples of apraxia and agnosia in life. We have the expressive aphasia, which is a form of apraxia, and also receptive aphasia, which is a form of agnosia.